This video is the second in a series for reloading of the 45 ACP pistol cartridge. Today we're going to go through the preparation of your brass in getting ready to load primer and powder. So we're going to talk about how do you determine that your brass is okay, how do you clean it, how do you deprime it to get it ready for priming. I hope you enjoy it. Stay tuned. As I mentioned in an earlier video, you want to manage your brass in such a way that you have 100 round units to work with, no more than that, because you're going to need some break in your processes. Having one of these containers that you get at almost any gun store or surplus store or place that sells guns works. They come in different sizes that hold the various cartridges. This one is designed for the 40 cal or 45 ACP. Now, you will notice that in this container there are some pieces of brass that are already deprimed. That means they don't have a primer in them, and others that are waiting to be deprimed. These that are already deprimed are once fired brass that you can buy in some bulk at a reloading store or a gun store, so you don't have to go through the process of depriming them. I had to do this because at the range I could not recover all of my brass. This brass up here is the brass that I was able to recover, and as I recover them I put them back into the same container that the full full cartridges were in. That way I can keep track. Now, the first thing we're going to do, and that you have to do, is to check the status of the brass. Now, will have been crawling around on the floor, you're picking up someone else's brass that has been shot, including your own, if you're lucky. So with this pistol brass, which is pretty robust, you need to check the top part, because as brass gets old and it's gone through lots and lots of cycles, you may start to see cracks up here. If you see any cracks or serious deformations, just throw it away. It's not worth messing with. So that's an important step. You don't want to start reloading brass that has any faults or in it. Once you've determined that the brass you're getting ready to deprime, which is the next step, is okay and doesn't have any faults in it, you're going to get your dies. Now, as I said in the earlier video, I highly recommend the Hornady set of dies. And the primary reason, as I said before, is the titanium nitride core. This means you do not have to lubricate your brass before you start to deprime it. Now we're going to select the die for depriming. And that's the one that has a little pin at the bottom. And that's for driving out the old primer. So we're going to seat this die into your press. Let me screw it in. Until it seats onto the press. Now, what's very, very important about this, as all of the dies, is they can be adjusted and should be adjusted according to the instructions in the box. Otherwise, you could damage both the press or the cartridge. So read the instructions and you do the adjustment of this die. It's not hard to do, and I'm not going to demonstrate it here because you need to follow the instructions. If you think you're going to have trouble, either go get a class or ask someone to help you. Now, once you've adjusted your die, you're going to take your piece of brass and you're going to put it in the brass holder there. You seat it in, and you'll take the handle and you'll raise the brass and you'll go up inside and boom. And there you go. The primer is out, and you do that for all the pieces of brass that you want to work with. It's just that simple. These little black things here are the place where the expended primers go. We'll do one more, and you just keep doing these until you're done. It's kind of like Zen. The one thing that you should pay attention to is never use force. If you pull your handle and you feel it hit on something or you don't feel it's quite right, there's supposed to be a smooth pressure, but if you hear clunking or you're anything like that, back off and check to see if anything is stuck or your brass is just not seated all the way over here. Using force with these presses always means there's a problem. Okay? Now, as you can see, all of the brass has now been deprimed, and again, I have 100 pieces of brass in this container. Now, one of the things that this die does is it removes the primer, and it also resizes the top part or the opening of the brass to make it perfectly round so that when you seat your bullets, there are no malformations or problems in seating the bullet. Takes it right back to the size that the brass needs to be for that process. The other thing for the die is that once, for this one specifically, once you've adjusted it so that you're getting the primer out correctly and you have the right distance with the little pin here, you just use the Allen wrench that comes with it, and then you tighten this lock bolt down, and you don't have to adjust it again, and this just comes out turned by hand. You don't have to use a wrench or anything to do that. So that makes it very convenient. Again, remember, this is the Hornady die, and the titanium nitride makes it so that you don't have to lube your brass at all to use the die resizing and pin and primer extraction process. Just as a matter of housekeeping, just as a hint, no matter how careful you are, spent primers will pop out of here. Some will not always go in the tray, and they will end up on the floor. If you have a hard floor, then those primers are going to go everywhere, and it's just a pain in the butt to go find them. So what I do is I just use a towel. It's an old beach towel, and the primers just bounce on there and stay where they are. You can easily see them, pick them up, and put them in the trash. Also good for when you're using powder. If there's any accidents at all, the powder goes on the towel instead of on your carpet. Now, if you recall, I said it took between 2 and 3 seconds per task, and this particular task took about 3 seconds per piece of brass, so that's about 5 minutes to deprime a box of 100 used pieces of brass. Not bad. Now that our brass is deprimed, it's ready for cleaning, and we're going to use sonic cleaning. It's much faster than trying to tumble clean your brass. We're using the Lyman digital ultrasonic cleaner. We're going to use 1 ounce of the turbosonic concentrate, and what makes it easy to do is that the bottle is graduated in 2 ounce increments, so it's easy to pour just 1 ounce. We'll pour 1 ounce in here, and we'll go to just below the max line for the water, and then put the brass in and have it cleaned for a few minutes. So the solution has been prepared. It took just a little bit. The 100 rounds of brass are now in the basket. The controls here are very simple. This is temperature, and which means you turn the heat on or off. I always like to use a heated method because it helps it clean faster. Now, this thing runs in up to 480 seconds, which is 8 minutes, and then it'll turn off. And you set it by hitting this button, and it goes to 480. I always start there, and I do 2 sessions of 8 minutes each. So we'll do that, and we'll turn it on. And it'll go ahead and clean, and after I've done 8 minutes, 2 sessions, which is 16 minutes, I'll be back. I think it's important to note that this can hold much more than 100 rounds in the basket. I've had as much as 200 rounds. Probably wouldn't go much more than that. But it's up to you. It depends on, and again, that's 45 ACP. So the size of the rounds depends on how much you can clean in here. And you notice it's still on its first cycle, and it's counting down from 200 seconds. But I did want to make mention of that. Now that the cleaning process is done, we take the basket, and you can see the brass is pretty. And that's 16 minutes in this solution. Now, one of the other reasons that we want to deprime first is so that all the solution can drain out of each casing back into the cleaning unit. Otherwise, it makes it, you end up with problems with the primer pocket not necessarily being clean, and other issues. So this makes sure all of the fluid is gone. Then we take it and just put it on a towel surface and dry it. And remember, there's no need to tumble this. There's nothing left on it on the brass that's an issue. And you do this for a minute. Just to get the brass dry, right? See how clean that is? And we'll just let it set and air dry. Now we're going to get ready to put primers or new primers into the brass casings that we've just cleaned. I'm going to be using the RCBS hand priming tool. Now, one of the things that you really need to pay attention to are the primers. Since I'm doing 45 ACP, I'm going to be using large pistol primers. Large pistol primers. There are different numbers, but this is the one that I use. And pretty much as long as it's a large pistol primer and you're not doing competition and you're not into that kind of stuff, almost any one they have works. But just remember, it's large pistol primers for 45 ACP. You can use Remington primers, CCI. You don't have to focus on any particular brand, but the thing to consider is that they all come in 100 unit packets. There's that 100 units again. So by thinking in terms of 100 units per reloading session, you tend to stay in sync with your materials. The next thing is the tool itself. This is the RCBS hand priming tool for putting in the primers. What I like about this is that it's ergonomic and it's very strong. It's well made and it won't break in thousands and thousands of rounds. So it's a very well made piece of gear. The other thing you need to think of is that the punch or the press, that's that little thing in the middle there. There's a small one and a large one. This is the large one for, guess what? Large primers, large pistol primers. There is a smaller one for small pistol primers, and this is also used for priming your any AR 223-556 ammo. So you have to pay attention to the size of the press. That's this little thing here. And this is the holder for the small one, and the one for the large one is already installed. This is the primer holder, and the top comes off, and you empty the box into here, and I'll demonstrate what that looks like in a second. As you get ready to empty the primer box into the holder, you need to exercise some care, otherwise you could spill and have primers all over the floor. So as you can see, there's only one edge where the one side that the primers can come out. And so you tilt it over, and so as you slide it out, the container is now empty. And the primers, as you see, are some are on the edge, some are not on the edge, so you just shake it around, which is what there are grooves in there, if you can see the grooves, and you just shake it until as many of the primers are shiny side down. You want shiny side down, and you can give it a little help. That one. So now that you're sure they're all shiny side down, you're ready to put the top back on. And there's a little hole right in the center that little piece fits into. And you just be a little careful. And it fits back on. Now, once the top is back on, there's a little lever here, and this is the gate that keeps the primers from coming out of the chute here. This chute is what's going to go inside of here. And you double check to make sure all the primers are shiny side down. Okay? And then the gate is closed, and then we're ready to put this inside of here and start our priming process. Okay, so I've to make things easier, I put the unprimed brass in one little bucket, and I'm going to prime it and then put it in this little bucket. That's just to keep things organized. And as you can see, I have the primers in. I'm going to release the gate so that the primers can flow down into the seating chamber. It looks like that. And you can see there's one primer in there. So you take a piece of brass and you put it right inside the seating, and then you squeeze. And it's just that simple. And you take it out, you can see that it now has a new primer in it, and you put it in a new bucket. And this is very Zen behavior. Seat the bullet, squeeze. Now the key is when you squeeze, it should feel very smooth but firm. You shouldn't have to break your hand to try to seat that. If it gets tight, that means there's something wrong, and you should stop and check what's going on either here or inside the seating chamber, or even in the round. If you run around on the ground at the range and pick up 45 ACP rounds, there are some 45 ACP rounds that have a smaller primer hole, and they take a smaller primer. These will not fit in there, and if you press and you can't get it all the way seated, then stop, check it out, throw that piece of brass away. And one more time, you put it in, and it's a very smooth, and the round is seated. And that's all there is to priming the rounds. So I'll go ahead and finish all of these, and when I'm done, I'll get back to you. There's two things you need to pay attention to with respect to safety. One is have eye protection. 2, when you're seating these, you notice that the cartridge is facing away from my body. Number 1, that's a natural wrist position, and 2, if anything goes wrong and you ignite the primer, you're not going to get it in your eyes. So the hand priming is complete. They look very nice and pretty. There were no problems, and it took about 2 seconds per round, so you figure 5 minutes, the same as for depriming and resizing. So now we are ready to put powder in these cartridges, and that'll be the next video.